My name is Stephen Callahan. I'm 41 years old. My wife's coat had a boarding pass in the inside pocket, folded into quarters, for a flight I never knew she took. The date on it was March 3rd, the same week she'd told me she was staying at her sister's place in Cleveland, 187 miles north. I only found it because Owen threw up on his own jacket at school, and I grabbed the nearest coat off the hook without thinking. When I asked her about it that night, casual, half a question, she went still for exactly 1 second too long before she laughed it off and asked if I'd seen her charger. I thought that would be the strangest part of my week. I was wrong. 4 days later, a man named Marcus called our house phone, a number almost nobody used anymore, and asked to speak to Rachel about finishing what they'd started at the conference. He hung up before I could ask which conference. But here's what he didn't know. I'd already taken a photo of that boarding pass with my phone 3 weeks before that call ever came. Somewhere down the road, there's a kitchen table with 2 coffees going cold on it, and I still don't know exactly what I said first when I finally sat down across from her. I know it changed everything that came after. Welcome to my channel, where we tell the stories nobody wants to admit are theirs, the moment trust breaks, and what a person does with the wreckage after. If this kind of story speaks to you, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and stick around, because it gets worse before it gets better. Let me back up. 13 years earlier, Rachel and I got married in her parents' backyard in July, and it rained for exactly 11 minutes right in the middle of the vows, and nobody moved, and we laughed about it for a decade after. That's the version of us I still carry around, even now. Whatever came later, that part was real. I need to say that clearly before I say anything else, because it would be easy to tell this story like we were always broken, and we weren't. Not at first. Not for a long time. I worked logistics for a regional freight company, the kind of job where the phone rings at 6 a.m. and doesn't really stop until you make it stop, which I never did. I told myself I was building something for us. A house with a yard big enough for the kids. A savings account that wouldn't flinch if the car died. I was proud of that. I still am, a little, even knowing what it cost. What it cost was Rachel. Not all at once. It was Tuesday dinners eaten without me because I was still at the warehouse reconciling a shipment that didn't matter as much as I thought it did. It was recitals I caught the second half of, sliding into a folding chair with my tie still on while Maya searched the crowd for me and found me late. Rachel never made a scene about any of it. She just got quieter. I mistook her quiet for peace. I think now it was something closer to resignation. She'd been an interior design consultant before Owen was born, sharp and good at it. The kind of person who could walk into a beige room and see exactly what it wanted to be. She scaled back to part-time when the kids were small, then never quite scaled back up, and I never asked her if she wanted to. I assumed. I was good at assuming things were fine because fine required nothing further from me. The first sign I actually remember, really remember, not just reconstructed later, was a Thursday in January. Rachel had started going to a monthly vendor mixer for work, something her old design firm still invited her to even though she barely freelanced anymore. She came home that night smelling like a restaurant I didn't recognize, something with heavy garlic and candle smoke, and she was humming. Actually humming, low under her breath, doing the dishes like it was nothing. I didn't think about it again for almost 3 weeks. I should have. Around the same time, my best friend Dale started acting strange whenever Rachel's name came up. Dale and I had known each other since college. He was the guy at our wedding who gave the toast that made Rachel's mother cry, in a good way. He worked in the same industry as Rachel, different company, and their paths crossed more than mine and hers ever did anymore, what with my schedule. I noticed Dale getting quiet whenever I mentioned her lately, changing the subject a beat too fast. I told myself he was just busy. Dale was always busy. Something tightened in my chest the first time I noticed it, though I didn't have a name for what it was yet. I just filed it away, the way I filed away most things that made me uncomfortable, quietly, without asking anyone to explain themselves. By February, the pattern had a shape I still couldn't see, only feel. Rachel started taking her phone into the bathroom when it rang. Small thing. Everyone does that sometimes. But she started doing it every time, and she started coming out a little too composed, a little too fast with an explanation nobody had asked for yet. Work stuff. Nothing important. She'd already answered a question I hadn't asked. I remember standing in the garage one night, supposedly looking for a flashlight. Actually just standing there because I didn't want to go back inside and sit across from whatever this feeling was. I didn't know yet that in about 6 weeks, a coat pocket would answer a question I hadn't let myself fully form. Maya turned 9 that February, and Rachel threw her a party with a cake shaped like a horse. And for one whole afternoon, everything looked exactly like what it was supposed to look like. Balloons, a backyard full of 9-year-olds, Rachel laughing at something one of the other moms said, her hand resting easy on my arm while we watched the kids run the yard. I remember thinking, watching her laugh like that I still loved the sound of it. I remember thinking we were fine. If I had looked a little closer at her phone that same week, it was sitting face down on the kitchen counter for almost an hour while she was outside with the kids. Everything that follows would have started 4 weeks earlier than it did. I didn't look. Trust, to me, meant not checking. I'd built my whole marriage on the idea that not asking was a form of respect. I didn't understand yet that it was also a way of not having to know. March came in cold that year, colder than Dayton usually gets, and Rachel announced on a Sunday night, folding laundry, not looking up from it, that she'd be driving up to her sister's in Cleveland for a few days the following week. Diane needed help picking paint for the nursery, she said, since Diane was 7 months along with her second. It was a completely reasonable thing for a sister to do. I told her to drive safe and kissed the top of her head and went back to the spreadsheet open on my laptop. She left on a Tuesday morning. She came back on a Thursday night, tired and a little sunburned in a way that struck me as odd for a Cleveland winter, though I didn't say anything. I helped carry her bag in. Her coat came off her shoulders and onto the hook by the door, the same as always. It sat there for 11 days before Owen threw up on his own jacket, and I grabbed the wrong coat without thinking twice. That's the moment I keep coming back to, even now. 11 ordinary days. Dinners, bedtimes, one argument about the dishwasher that meant nothing. 11 days where I was still, in every way that mattered to me, a man who trusted his wife completely, and she was already someone I hadn't fully met yet. The jacket was in my hands before I even registered what I was looking at. Owen was crying in the mudroom, covered in his own sick, and I was grabbing whatever coat was closest to shove his arms into something dry. It happened to be Rachel's. My hand went into the pocket looking for gloves for him. Instead, I found a folded piece of paper, stiff at the corners, the kind of stiff that comes from being folded and unfolded a few times. I almost didn't open it. I want that on the record. I almost put it right back. A boarding pass. Dayton to Charlotte. March 3rd. Her name on it. Not Diane's address anywhere near it. No mention of Cleveland at all. I stood there in the mudroom with Owen still sniffling against my leg and read it twice. Charlotte wasn't on the way to anything. Charlotte wasn't near Cleveland. Charlotte was 400 miles in the wrong direction. I put it back exactly where I found it. I don't know why. Some instinct told me not to let her know I'd seen it yet. Not until I understood what I was looking at. I finished getting Owen cleaned up. I made dinner. I did not say a word. That night, lying next to her in the dark, I asked, as casually as I could manage, whether her flight up to Diane's had been smooth. I drove, she said. Fast. Too fast. Right, I said. Forgot. She rolled over and asked if I'd seen her charger. I hadn't. The conversation moved on like nothing had happened, and for about 4 seconds, I almost let it. But that wasn't the part that scared me. What scared me was how easily the lie came out of her, smooth, immediate, like she'd said it before. I didn't confront her. I told myself I needed more before I said anything, that a boarding pass alone could mean 100 things. A work trip she didn't want to explain. A surprise for me. Something innocent the first hadn't thought of. I was good at that, building a case for her before she'd even asked me to. 2 days later, Dale came over to watch the game. Same as most Sundays for the last 6 years. He brought beer, same brand as always, and for the first hour it was normal. Us on the couch, kids upstairs, Rachel in and out of the kitchen. Then I mentioned, offhand, that Rachel had been in Charlotte the week before instead of Cleveland like she'd said, and I watched something cross Dale's face that lasted less than a second and told me more than an hour of conversation would have. He covered it fast. Too fast. Charlotte's got some vendor conferences this time of year, he said, eyes back on the TV. Probably a work thing. I let it go. I told myself Dale would know. He worked adjacent to her industry. He'd hear about that kind of thing before I would. It made sense. It made too much sense, actually. The way he had an answer ready before I'd even finished the question. I didn't think about it again until 3 days later, when I asked Rachel straight out if she'd gone to a work conference in Charlotte, and she looked at me like I'd caught her stealing. Who told you that? She said. Not a question. An accusation. Does it matter? Dale, she said, must have mentioned something. Her voice had gone flat in a way I didn't recognize. Then, before I could respond, she said the conference had been nothing, boring, a waste of a week, and changed the subject to whether we needed more coffee filters. I bought coffee filters the next day and didn't ask anything else for 11 days. That's the pattern I fell into that whole month. Notice something wrong, build a story that made it not wrong, and go quiet. I wasn't stupid. I want to be honest about that. I noticed things. I just decided, every single time, that noticing wasn't the same as knowing, and knowing would cost more than I was ready to pay. Rachel's behavior kept shifting in ways I filed and didn't follow up on. She started taking longer showers, coming out with her hair already dry, like she'd been standing in there doing something other than showering. She started leaving her phone face down on every surface she set it on. The counter, the nightstand, the arm of the couch, a habit she'd never had before. Once, her phone buzzed on the kitchen table while she was upstairs, and I glanced at the screen out of pure reflex. A name I didn't recognize. Marcus. No message preview, just the name and a notification that said it had already been read on another device. I didn't ask her about it. I told myself it was probably a vendor contact, someone from her old firm. Nothing. I was getting good at that sentence. Nothing. I used it like a tool, prying my own suspicion back out of my hands every time it showed up. If you've ever caught yourself explaining away a feeling you knew was real, just to keep the ground under you steady one more day, stay with me, because what I found 3 weeks later wasn't something I could explain away anymore. Work didn't slow down to accommodate any of this. If anything, it got worse. A client account in Indianapolis started falling apart, and I was pulling 12-hour days trying to hold it together, coming home too tired to think straight about anything happening under my own roof. Rachel would ask how my day was, and I'd say fine, and she'd nod like she expected that answer, like she'd stopped expecting anything more specific a long time ago. I didn't notice how long ago that had started. I was too busy being needed somewhere else. I noticed things before I did. She was 9, sharp in the way kids that age sometimes are, and one night at dinner she asked, completely out of nowhere, why Mom kept going to see the lady with the paint samples so much. Rachel's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Just for a second. Then she smiled and said Aunt Diane's nursery was taking forever to get right, and Maya shrugged and went back to her mac and cheese, satisfied. I should have asked what Maya meant by so much. I didn't. I told myself kids exaggerate. That was the second time in 2 weeks a child in my house had said something that would have changed everything if I'd actually listened to it. By the end of the month, Rachel had started a new habit I noticed but couldn't name yet. She'd started apologizing for things that didn't need an apology. Being 5 minutes late picking up Owen from practice. Forgetting to buy milk. Small things, over-explained, over-corrected, like she was building up credit against something bigger she hadn't told me about yet. I remember one night in particular, close to the end of March, when she came and sat next to me on the couch after the kids were asleep and put her head on my shoulder without saying anything, the way she used to do early in our marriage, before things got quiet between us. She stayed there a long time. I put my arm around her, and we didn't talk. I remember thinking, in that moment, that whatever had felled off lately must have just been me. Stress from work, imagination running loose. I remember feeling, for about 20 minutes, like we were fine. I didn't know it yet, but that was the last night I'd feel that way for a long time. And the next time she leaned into me like that, it would mean something I couldn't have imagined sitting on that couch. April opened with a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. I'd come home early, a rare thing, maybe twice a year, meaning to surprise Rachel and the kids with takeout from the place she liked on 5th Street. I let myself in quiet out of habit more than intention, and I heard her voice from the kitchen before I saw her, low and fast, the kind of tone you use when you don't want to be overheard. I told you, not this week, he's already asking questions. She turned and saw me in the doorway, and the sentence just stopped, cut clean in half like scissors through paper. Who's that? I said. I kept my voice easy. I didn't feel easy. Diane, she said, already reaching to end the call. She's stressed about the baby shower. I put the takeout bags on the counter and didn't say anything else. But I noticed her hand was shaking slightly when she reached for the plates, and I noticed she didn't call Diane back that night, or the next, even though she usually talked to her sister 3 or 4 times a week. I called Diane myself 2 days later, using the excuse of asking about baby shower dates. Diane sounded confused. What baby shower? I wasn't even going to do one this time, Stephen. It's my second. That was the first time the ground actually moved under me. Not tilted, moved. She said it like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. I sat in my truck in the parking lot at work for 11 minutes after that call before I went inside. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry yet, either. I felt something closer to disbelief, the kind where your brain keeps offering you softer explanations even after the hard one is already sitting right in front of you. Maybe Diane forgot. Maybe there was a shower and Diane just wasn't the one throwing it. I built 4 different versions of an innocent explanation in 11 minutes, and none of them held up past the parking lot. I started watching more carefully after that. Not confronting, watching. I told myself I needed to be sure before I said anything. That accusing her of something I couldn't prove would only make her more careful, would only teach her to hide it better. Some part of me knew that reasoning was really just fear wearing a more respectable coat. I wasn't ready for the answer, so I kept collecting questions instead. I checked our joint credit card statement online that weekend, something I hadn't looked at closely in months since Rachel usually handled the household budget. Most of it was ordinary: groceries, gas, Owen's soccer fees. But there was a charge from a hotel in Charlotte, dated March 3rd through March 5th, for $412.60. 2 nights. I photographed it. Didn't say anything. Opened the bank app on my phone to check if there'd been a second charge I'd missed. There wasn't. Just the one. Which meant either she'd paid for a second room in cash, or she hadn't needed a second room at all. That thought sat in my stomach for the rest of the weekend, like something I'd swallowed wrong. I still didn't say anything to her. Instead, I brought it to Dale, because Dale was the person I brought everything to, and because some part of me, the part that still trusted him completely, believed he'd help me make sense of it, or tell me I was imagining things, and I'd believe him either way. We met for beers at the place near his apartment, and I laid it out: the boarding pass, the hotel charge, the phone call I'd walked in on. Dale listened, nodding slow, and when I finished he took a long pull from his beer and said, "Man, I don't know. Could be nothing. People do weird stuff with expense reports sometimes. Maybe it got mixed up with a work thing." It was a strange answer, specific in a way that didn't fit a man who claimed not to know anything. "What work thing?" I said. "I don't know, Stephen. I'm just saying, don't jump to the worst version before you've got the full picture." He wouldn't quite look at me when he said it. I let it go that night. I want to be honest. Some part of me needed Dale to be neutral ground. Needed at least one person in my life who wasn't part of whatever this was turning into. I wasn't ready to lose that too. If I'd pushed harder on Dale that night instead of finishing my beer and changing the subject, I'd have found out 3 weeks sooner than I did exactly how much he already knew. She told me, much later, what those weeks had actually felt like on her end, a version of events I only got long after everything came apart. I told myself it was already over the second I got back from Charlotte. That's what I kept saying in my head, over and over, like a promise I could actually keep. It's done. That's it. I sat in my car in our driveway before going inside that Thursday, and I made myself believe it. Then Stephen asked how the drive was, and I said I drove, and the lie came out so easily it scared me more than the affair itself had. I didn't recognize my own voice. I kept thinking about Maya's horse cake, how normal that afternoon had felt, how I'd laughed for real watching her blow out the candles, and I hated myself for being able to hold both things at once, loving my family and still wanting to answer his texts. I told myself I'd stop. I told myself that a lot that month. That's what she told me. I knew none of it yet. Around the middle of April, Rachel started going quiet in a different way than before. Not guarded quiet, but flat, distracted, the kind of quiet where you can tell someone's mind is somewhere else entirely even when their body is sitting across the table from you. She burned dinner twice in 1 week, something that never happened. She forgot to pick Owen up from a friend's house and didn't remember until the friend's mother called. And when she got off the phone, she stood in the kitchen for a long moment, just staring at nothing before she grabbed her keys. I noticed. I didn't ask. If you've ever watched someone you love slowly come apart in front of you and told yourself it wasn't your business to ask why, I understand that silence better than I wish I did. Because what came next made me question whether staying quiet had ever really been kindness, or just fear dressed up as patience. The last week of April, I drove past Rachel's old design firm on my way back from a client site, a detour I hadn't planned, Just an old habit from years ago when I used to swing by and surprise her at lunch. Her car wasn't in the lot. That wasn't strange on its own. She didn't work there full-time anymore. What was strange was that she'd told me that morning she'd be there most of the day, finishing up paperwork for a vendor mixer. I didn't follow her. I want to be clear about that. I'm not the kind of man who does that, or wasn't back then. I just drove home, slower than I needed to, turning the discrepancy over and over, trying to find the version of it that wasn't what it looked like. I couldn't find one. That night, I sat across from her at dinner, Maya and Owen arguing about something on the other end of the table, and I watched Rachel laugh at something Maya said, a real laugh, easy, unguarded. And for one terrible second, I hated how much I still loved the sound of it. I hated that some part of me was already grieving something I hadn't even confirmed was lost yet. I still hadn't confronted her. I told myself I was waiting for certainty. The truth was closer to this. Some part of me understood that once I asked the real question out loud, there would be no version of my life that looked like this one ever again. And I wasn't ready to let go of the version where I still didn't know. I didn't sleep much that week. I'd lie awake next to her, listening to her breathe, running through the boarding pass, the hotel charge, Diane's confused voice on the phone, Dale's strange answer, trying to build all of it into something I could act on. My appetite went somewhere else entirely. I'd sit down to eat and push food around the plate and call it full. By the 1st of May, I'd stopped waiting for certainty on its own to arrive. I decided, lying awake at 2 in the morning, that I was going to find it myself. I didn't know yet that the thing I found would come from somewhere I never expected to look, and that once I found it, putting it back exactly where it belonged would be the hardest thing I did all spring. I started small. That's how these things go, I think. You don't wake up one day and decide to become someone who checks. You just take one step, tell yourself it's the last one, and then take another. The first thing I did was pull up our shared cloud photo account, the one that automatically synced from both our phones. I hadn't looked at it in months. Buried in a folder from early March, photos Rachel had taken, then apparently deleted from her own phone, but forgot still lived in the shared backup, were 4 pictures. A hotel room. Generic, forgettable, except for the view out the window. A parking garage with a sign reading Charlotte Convention Center, Level 3. I sat with that for a long time before I did anything else. 2 of the 4 photos had a man's hand in frame, reaching for a room service tray, a watch on his wrist I didn't recognize, silver with a blue face. Not Rachel's hand. Not mine. I didn't say anything to her. I photographed the photos with my own phone, a strange, small betrayal of my own, documenting evidence of a betrayal using the same tool she might have used to hide it. And then I closed the app and put my phone face down on the counter, the exact habit I'd started noticing in her 2 months earlier. That was the first time I understood, really understood, that I'd become someone who kept things from his own wife too now. I didn't like who that made me, but I didn't stop. A week later, I did something I'd never done in 13 years of marriage. I went through her purse while she was in the shower. My hands were shaking the whole time, which surprised me more than what I actually found. A receipt, folded small, tucked behind her wallet. A jewelry store in downtown Dayton. $340. Dated April 19th. Nothing had shown up in our house that matched that price. No new earrings, no bracelet, nothing on her at all that I recognized as new. I put the receipt back exactly where I'd found it, folded the same way, tucked at the same angle. That night at dinner, Rachel reached across the table for the salt, and her sleeve rode up, just for a second, and I saw a thin gold bracelet on her wrist I'd never seen before. She caught me looking and pulled her sleeve back down without a word, and neither of us said anything about it. The faucet dripped in the kitchen sink behind her. Drip, drip. Neither of us said anything else for the rest of the meal. I didn't think about that receipt again for 6 days. I should have connected it sooner to something Maya said the following Tuesday. Mommy has a new bracelet, but she said not to tell you it's new. And I filed that too, the way I'd filed everything else that spring, into a growing pile I still wasn't ready to look at all at once. The call with Dale that finally cracked something open happened by accident. I'd asked him to help me move a dresser out of the garage that Saturday, something ordinary, something we'd done a dozen times over the years. Halfway through wrestling it into the truck bed, his phone buzzed on the tailgate, and a text notification lit up the screen before he grabbed it. Marcus. Tell her I said thanks for covering for us at the mixer, appreciate it. Dale saw me see it. His face went the color of the drywall behind him. "That's not what it looks like," he said. Too fast, the exact same rhythm Rachel had used on the boarding pass night. "What's it look like, Dale?" He didn't answer right away. He set his end of the dresser down on the truck bed harder than he needed to, and for a second I thought he might actually tell me the truth. Instead, he said, "Marcus is a guy from her old firm's network. They do these joint vendor things sometimes. I probably got looped in on some group thread by mistake." I let it sit there between us, unspoken, the two of us standing in my driveway, both pretending the dresser needed more attention than it did. But here's the thing. That wasn't the part that scared me. What scared me was that Dale had never once, in all my questions over the past month, mentioned knowing who Marcus was. Now, suddenly, he had a whole explanation ready, smooth as anything. I didn't push it that day. I finished loading the dresser, we finished the beers we'd started earlier, and Dale left a little earlier than usual, waving from his car in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes. If I'd grabbed his phone out of his hand right then instead of letting him drive off, I'd have learned 3 weeks early exactly how long he'd been covering for both of them, and exactly what covering had cost him to keep quiet about. By the second week of May, I had enough pieces that the shape underneath them was no longer deniable, even to a man as practiced at not looking as I'd become. The boarding pass, the hotel charge, the photos with the stranger's hand and the watch, the bracelet, Dale's text, Diane's confused voice on the phone, still echoing in my head weeks later. What I didn't have yet was Marcus's full name, or what he actually looked like, or how long this had been going on before March. I got the first of those on a Thursday, almost by accident. Rachel had left her laptop open on the kitchen table while she ran out to grab Owen from a friend's, and her personal email was still logged in. I want to be honest about this. I stood there for almost a full minute deciding whether to look. Something tightened in my chest the whole time, and I remember thinking, clear as anything, that whatever I found in the next 60 seconds I could never unfind. I looked anyway. There wasn't much. She was careful. I'd learn later, careful in a way that told its own story about how much thought she'd put into this. But there was one email, unsent, sitting in her drafts folder, 3 lines long, addressed to nobody, the to field empty. I don't know how to say this to Stephen. I don't know how to say it to myself. I keep thinking about the day at the lake when we first met, and how far away that feels now, like it happened to someone else. I read it twice. I didn't touch anything else. I closed the laptop exactly the way I'd found it, screen at the same angle, and I sat down at the table and didn't move for a long time. The lake. She'd mentioned a lake once, months back, in passing, some work retreat 2 summers ago, a team-building thing for her old firm, before she'd scaled back to part-time. I hadn't thought about it since. Now I understood, sitting at my own kitchen table with my hands flat on the wood, that whatever this was hadn't started in March at all. It had started 2 summers ago, at a lake I couldn't even picture, with a man whose full name I still didn't have. That was the moment the whole shape of the spring rearranged itself in my head. This wasn't a few reckless weeks. This was something she'd been carrying, in some form, for 2 years, through Maya's birthday, through our anniversary in September, through every ordinary Tuesday I'd assumed was exactly what it looked like. I didn't confront her that night. I told myself, again, that I needed to be sure, but underneath that reasoning was something rawer now, something closer to fear of what confronting her would actually unmake. As long as I hadn't said the words out loud, some small, stubborn part of my life was still intact. I wasn't ready to let that go yet, even holding what I was holding. I closed the laptop and put it back exactly where she'd left it, angled the same way. And when she came home 20 minutes later with Owen in tow, I helped him with his shoes and asked her how her afternoon was, and she said fine, and I said mine was fine too. Neither of us was telling the truth. I don't think either of us had told each other the truth in longer than either of us wanted to admit. If you've ever held something that could break your whole life open and chosen, one more time, to put it back exactly where you found it, you already understand why I didn't say anything that night. What I didn't understand yet was how much longer I'd managed to hold it. 2 nights later, I drove to the jewelry store downtown on my lunch break, the one from the receipt, and asked the clerk, casual, like I was thinking of buying something similar for my wife, whether she remembered a bracelet sold around April 19th. She didn't remember the sale, but she pulled up the record when I described it and mentioned, without thinking twice, that the account on file for pickup listed 2 names for the order, Rachel's, and a second name for delivery confirmation. Marcus Whitfield. I had a full name now. I didn't do anything with it yet. I drove back to work, sat in the parking lot for longer than my lunch break allowed, and didn't tell a single person what I now knew. Not Dale, who I no longer fully trusted, and not Rachel, who I was no longer sure I recognized. I didn't know it yet, but in 11 days I'd be standing across a kitchen table from both of them at once, and the man whose name I'd just learned would be the last person I expected to see walk through my own front door. The kids were at a sleepover at Maya's friend's house that Friday, a birthday party, dropped off with sleeping bags and too much candy, not due back until Saturday noon. I told Rachel I had a late client call and wouldn't be home until 9. That wasn't true. I'd finished at 4 and sat in my truck 3 blocks from the house for almost 2 hours, watching the light change, trying to decide if I was ready. I wasn't. I went home anyway. The house was quiet when I let myself in through the garage, quiet in a way that felt different from our usual quiet. I heard Rachel's voice from the kitchen, low, and for a second I thought she was on the phone again. Then I heard a second voice answer her, a man's voice, and every version of calm I'd built up over the last 11 days came apart at once. I stood in the hallway and didn't move. Shouldn't even be here. Marcus, if he comes home. He said 9. It's barely 7. I stepped into the kitchen doorway. Rachel saw me first. Her face did something I'd never seen it do before. Not surprise exactly, something closer to a switch flipping off. The man standing on the other side of my kitchen island was maybe my age, silver watch with a blue face on his left wrist, and I understood, looking at that watch, that I was looking at the hand from the hotel photos. Nobody said anything for what felt like a long time. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside a car door shut. Stephen, Rachel started. I set my phone on the counter between us, screen up, open to the photo of the boarding pass. Then, one at a time, without raising my voice, I laid the rest of it down beside it. A printed copy of the hotel charge, the jewelry store receipt, a screenshot of the unsent email about the lake. Here's what I know, I said. Here's what doesn't add up. I want you to explain it. All of it. My voice stayed flat the whole time I said it, which surprised me more than anything else in that kitchen. Underneath the flatness was something boiling that I didn't trust myself to let out yet. Marcus looked between the two of us, and to his credit, or maybe just his cowardice, he said, I should go, and reached for his jacket on the bar stool. Sit down, I said. He sat down. Rachel's hand went to the edge of the counter, steadying herself. It's not what you think, she said. The hotel, that was a work conference, Stephen. I told you. You told me you drove to Cleveland. She stopped. Started again. Charlotte had a vendor thing. I was going to tell you. It just got complicated with the timing. The bracelet, I said. The receipt has his name on it for pickup confirmation. Her mouth opened and nothing came out for a second. Then, it's not what it looks like. It was a gift from the whole team. It wasn't. The team bought you a $340 bracelet and had it engraved with a delivery note to a man who was also photographed in a hotel room with you. I hadn't meant to say the engraving detail. I'd found it in the jeweler's records, a line I hadn't mentioned yet, and watching her face when I said it told me everything the receipt itself hadn't. She went quiet. The kitchen faucet dripped once, twice, into the sink. Neither of us moved to fix it. It didn't mean anything, she said finally, quieter now. It was stupid. It was a mistake. One time, at the conference, we'd had too much wine, and it just... The lake, I said. 2 summers ago. You wrote about it. Not one time, Rachel. Something in her face folded when I said that. I watched 13 years of careful denial run out of road all at once. That was when Marcus, still sitting stiffly on the bar stool, said the thing that split the whole room open in a different direction. Stephen, man, I didn't know she was. Dale never told me you two had never met me, I thought. Dale, I said. Marcus's face went the color of the countertop. Rachel closed her eyes. I didn't understand yet what that meant. I only understood that a name I'd trusted for 20 years had just landed in the middle of a kitchen full of things I hadn't wanted to know, and it wasn't going anywhere good. I called Dale. He picked up on the second ring, heard my voice, and went silent in a way that told me before he said a single word. He came over 20 minutes later. I don't know why he came, except maybe some instinct that the thing he'd been holding for 2 years had finally slipped out of his hands, and he needed to see how badly it had landed. He stood just inside the kitchen doorway, not sitting, not saying much, his eyes moving between Rachel and Marcus and me like a man doing arithmetic he already knew the answer to. You knew? I said. Not a question. Dale didn't answer right away. How long? Stephen. How long, Dale? Since the retreat, he said finally, barely above a whisper. 2 years. Marcus works with me. They met at the joint thing our companies did at the lake. I didn't. I never thought it would go anywhere. And then it did. And by the time it mattered, I didn't know how to tell you without losing you both. Something in me went very still, hearing that. Not calm still. The kind of still that comes right before something breaks. You sat in my living room every Sunday for 2 years, I said. He didn't answer that one at all. I turned back to Rachel. Tell me the rest, I said. All of it. Now. She looked at Marcus, then at Dale, then finally at me, and something in her seemed to give way all at once. Not tears yet, just a kind of exhaustion, like she'd been holding something heavy for so long her arms had simply stopped being able to. It started at the lake, she said. You weren't there. You were never there, Stephen. That whole summer you were buried in the Indianapolis account, and I sat through 3 days of team dinners alone, and Marcus was just easy to talk to. That first night, I told myself it was nothing. One conversation on a dock at 11 at night. Nothing happened. I told myself that was true for almost a year. She stopped, started again, her voice smaller now. I don't know when it stopped being nothing. There wasn't one moment. It was small things, a text back and forth, then more of them. Then the mixer in January where that was the first time. I told myself it was a one-time thing, the same as every time after that, and I believed it every single time, right up until the next time I didn't stop myself. Her hands were shaking. I couldn't look at the kids' drawings on the fridge for weeks after Charlotte. I'd stand in this kitchen and not be able to look at that fridge. The lake wasn't the beginning, she said, and this was the part that reorganized everything I thought I understood. I went looking for him again after. He didn't pursue me, Stephen. I asked Dale for his number that September after the retreat. I made the first move. I need you to know that, because I let you believe this was something that happened to me. It wasn't. I chased it. Nobody spoke. The faucet dripped again. I was so tired of being invisible in my own house, she said, quieter still. And I know that's not an excuse. I know that. I needed you to know I wasn't a victim in this. I was the one who kept choosing it. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I looked at the boarding pass still sitting on the counter, at the bracelet on her wrist she still hadn't taken off, at Dale standing frozen by the door, at Marcus staring at his own hands. Get out, I said. I wasn't shouting. My voice had gone somewhere flatter and colder than shouting. Both of you. Now. Marcus left without another word. Dale hesitated at the door, started to say something. My name, maybe, or an apology that had no shape yet. And I looked at him until he stopped trying and left too. Rachel stood alone in the kitchen with me, 13 years and all of it sitting on the counter between us and photographs and receipts. Stephen, she said, I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight. I just need you to know I see what I did. I picked up my phone off the counter, put it in my pocket, and didn't answer her. I didn't know it yet, standing in that kitchen with the faucet still dripping, that the hardest conversation of the whole spring wasn't the one that had just happened. It was the one still waiting for me, 3 weeks out, in a lawyer's office neither of us had booked yet. Insufficient information to generate summary. I filed for divorce 11 days later. Rachel didn't contest it and didn't ask for the house. She said, quietly, over the phone, that she didn't think she had the right to ask me for anything anymore. We split custody close to even, Maya and Owen with me during the week, with her on weekends, and neither of us fought over furniture or accounts the way I'd heard other couples do. It felt less like a war and more like two people carefully taking apart something they'd built together, trying not to break what still had use left in it, mostly for the kids. Marcus disappeared from the picture almost immediately. Rachel told me, months later, in one of our brief co-parenting conversations, that he'd stopped answering her calls within 2 weeks of that night in the kitchen. No explanation, no closure, just silence. The same currency he'd traded in for 2 years. She said it without asking for my sympathy. I didn't offer any. Some things end exactly the way they should. Dale I never spoke to again. He tried, twice, a text in June, a longer one in August, both apologies, both unanswered. Word got back to me through a mutual friend, months later, that he'd left his job that fall after people at the company found out what he'd covered up. Nobody fires a man for his personal life. But trust, once people see it broken in one place, tends to make them wonder where else it might be broken too. I didn't feel triumphant hearing that. I felt something closer to tired. Rachel kept the bracelet in a drawer, she told me once, months after everything, unable to explain why she hadn't thrown it away. I didn't ask her to explain it. Some things people carry because getting rid of them would mean admitting exactly how much they'd given up for so little. The quiet moment came on a Tuesday in October, 7 months after that night in the kitchen. I was dropping the kids back at Rachel's apartment, smaller than the house, a 2-bedroom on the other side of town, and Owen ran ahead to show her something he'd made at school, and Maya lingered by the car with me for a second. "Dad," she said, "are you happy now?" I hadn't expected the question. I thought about lying, the easy answer, the one that would end the conversation faster. I didn't. "I'm getting there," I told her. She nodded like that was a real answer, the kind a 9-year-old accepts without needing more, and ran up the walk after her brother. I stood by the car for a minute, watching Rachel open the door for them, watching her kneel down to hug Owen the way she always had, watching the ordinary shape of a life that used to be mine from the outside now. I drove home. The house felt different that fall than it had in the spring. Not emptier, exactly. Quieter in a way that had stopped feeling like a wound. I met Elena in January, almost by accident, at a parent-teacher conference for her son, who was in Maya's class. We talked for 20 minutes in a school hallway about nothing important, a math worksheet, a school fundraiser, and I noticed, driving home, that I hadn't once checked my phone the whole time we talked. It had been a long time since a conversation had held my attention like that, without my job pulling at the edges of it. We had coffee 3 weeks later. I told her, early, more than she probably needed to know that soon, what had happened with Rachel, the boarding pass, the coat pocket, all of it. She listened without flinching, and when I finished she said, "That sounds like it took a long time to see clearly." Nobody had put it that way to me before. It was the first time since March that I felt like someone was looking at the whole shape of what happened to me, not just the worst single moment of it. It was the right call. I never doubted it again. I could have stayed angry at Rachel. Some days, if I'm honest, some small part of me still could. I chose something else instead. Not forgiveness exactly. Not yet, maybe not ever fully, but a kind of peace that let me pick the kids up from her place without my jaw tightening every time. That was the only kind of winning that ever felt real to me in the end. I picked up Owen's shoes from the mudroom floor that same October night, set them by the door where they belonged, and turned off the kitchen light on my way upstairs. The faucet had finally stopped dripping. I'd fixed it back in June, a 20-minute job I'd put off for years because I never seemed to have the time. That's my story. A boarding pass in a coat pocket, a bracelet in a drawer she still hasn't thrown out, a faucet that finally stopped dripping once I actually got around to fixing it. Thank you for staying with me through all of it. If any part of this found something familiar in your own life, tell me in the comments. I read every one, and I'd genuinely love to hear your story too. See you in the next one. The hardest thing to admit about a marriage that ends this way isn't that someone lied. It's that both people, in their own separate rooms, had stopped telling each other the truth long before anyone crossed a line that couldn't be walked back. Stephen's mistake wasn't trust itself. It was mistaking the absence of questions for the presence of intimacy. He built a life around providing, and told himself that was the same as showing up. And for years neither he nor Rachel corrected that story out loud, because correcting it would have meant admitting something was already missing. That's the quieter tragedy underneath the affair. Two people slowly stopped reaching for each other, and only one of them found someone else to reach for instead. What makes this story different from a simple villain and victim account is Rachel's own admission in that kitchen. That she went looking, that Marcus didn't pursue her, that she chased the thing that broke her marriage rather than falling into it by accident. That detail matters. It refuses the easy version where loneliness excuses everything. Loneliness can explain a choice without making that choice anyone's fault but hers. Dale's betrayal complicates the story in a different direction entirely. A 20-year friendship undone not by malice, but by cowardice stretched out over 2 years until it calcified into something indistinguishable from complicity. There's a lesson in that most people don't recognize while it's happening. Silence, held long enough, becomes its own kind of choice. Dale never decided to betray Stephen. He just kept not deciding to tell him, until the not deciding became the same thing. What the story ultimately leaves behind isn't a verdict on who deserved what. Rachel lost the marriage, and eventually the man she'd risked it for, and whatever version of herself she'd been building in secret for 2 years. Stephen lost 13 years he'll never fully stop mourning in some quiet corner of himself. Even now, even happy. Neither of them got to walk away clean. That's closer to how these things actually end than any story with a clear winner. Somewhere in your own life, there's probably a version of that dripping faucet, something small, easy to fix, that you've been stepping around for longer than you'd like to admit. It's worth asking yourself what you're actually avoiding when you tell yourself there's no time.